Thank you for joining us for this webinar on how the Air Quality Control Act impacts the printing industry, brought to you by Printing SA. I'm Megan McCarthy, editor of Africa Print. I'd like to introduce our panelists, Abisha Katerere, Printing SA Marketing Manager and BBBEE Specialist, Oleboheng Sydney Machediso, Control Environmental Officer at the Department of Environmental Affairs, Tina Costas, Director of the Norton Rose Fulbright South Africa Inc., as well as Dr. Ian James, Director at WKC Group. Just on housekeeping rules, if you have a question for the panelists, please post these in the question section. We will have a dedicated question and answer session after the panelists' discussions. The chat section is just for general banter. We've also shared the panelists' contact details there, so you are welcome to contact them. And please also remember to take our polls in the polls section. So with that, Abisha, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Megan. Good morning to all of our panelists, as well as our guests that have taken the time to be part of this very important session, as it's got real implications for our industry. As some of you will know, that Printing SA's mandate is to advocate for the industry. And that includes analyzing some of the legislation that we feel will impact on our sector. One of those is the Section 23 Draft Air Quality Act. And the notice has been republished now for the second time. And as Printing SA, we felt that we needed to have another crack at it. So we applied to the Minister for an extension, which was granted to us because this was due on the 7th of September. So now we've been granted an extension to the 22nd of September. Now, some of you will know that our mandate comes from our members, so we could not submit a public comment on behalf of the industry without industry consultation. Hence, we've created this platform. This session will hopefully shed some light into this act's implications on the sector, and we encourage you guys as our guests that are on this webinar to pose as many questions as possible to our panel of experts. As like I said, this will be our last opportunity to provide input into the final draft comment before we submit on the 22nd. Now, without any further ado, I will hand over to Mr. Oleboheng Machediso, who's the Controlled Environmental Officer at Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries, who's going to take us through a brief presentation on the Act and highlight a few key points. And thereafter, we'll enter into a little bit of discussion with our panelists. So over to you, Oleboheng.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Oleboheng Machediso, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you the work that we've been doing since 2012 on preparing the regulation for this sector. I've got some slides that I will share with you just to introduce the subject and the work that we have done so far. I believe that everyone can see the slides.
Not yet.
Yeah, the screen hasn't come on yet. If you enable the screen sharing.
There we go.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you. The presentation, I've got a few slides. They are very detailed so that they can be shared with the members at the later stage. But I'm not going to go through all of them in the interest of time. So we'll just present on the legal framework for emission control in South Africa. The regulation of the printing sector, why is it necessary for us to regulate this sector at this point, and the implications of the proposed notice on the printing sector and the next steps. So in terms of the legislative framework, we know, as you know, that the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa has got the Bill of Rights, which mandates us as government to protect the right to environment that is not harmful to health and well-being for everyone who is in South Africa. And one of the legislation that is pivoted in this right is the National Environmental Management Equality Act, which adopts the objective of equality management to give effect to the constitutional mandate. So we are required by law, by the Constitution, to make sure that the environmental rights in terms of the quality of air that is not harmful to health and well-being, they are given effect to. And how we are doing that in South Africa, we've got the ambient air quality standards, which define the targets for ambient air quality. It tells you the quality of air that we breathe, and tells you which it specifies which are acceptable emission limits or air quality limits in terms of protecting the environment and human health. Furthermore, the Act creates mechanisms and tools to achieve the desired ambient air quality. So for us to be able to attain the ambient air quality, or the quality of air that is not harmful to health and well-being, there are various tools that the Act prescribes, from the air quality management planning for declaration of priority areas, which are pollution hotspots, and minimum emission standards for the listed activities, which are mainly activities that are of very significant pollution, that result in very significant pollution, like the energy sector, your petrochemicals, and many others. We also have got emission standards for controlled emitters. These are the significant sources of pollution which are on their own cannot really result in significant environmental pollution, but cumulatively, if they operate, if you've got many of them operating at the same time in a specific airshed, they've got potential to result in significant contribution to pollution. And this is where the printing industry is currently proposed to be regulated. And we also have got emission standards for controlled fuels and measures for the control of dust, odor, and noise. So in terms of the principles that we have adopted under the Air Quality Act, in terms of how we identify industries that should be regulated and prioritize which ones should be regulated first. We understand that not all industries emit pollution into the atmosphere, and not all industries that do have emissions could be regarded as significant negative impact. So as such, there's no practical or administrative sense to regulate every industry. However, there are certain industries that have impact on air quality, and these ones should be regulated if we are to meet the national ambient air quality standards. And how we determine that, we've got factors that we consider to define the significance, which are mainly related to environmental risks in terms of the nature and quantities of pollutants released, the environmental impacts and economic importance of those industries as well. And we also consider production capacities and rate of consumption of resources like your raw materials, because that also may generate additional environmental burden. So these factors, we use them to influence the nature of the regulation that we adopt. So in terms of the regulation of the printing sector specifically, why this sector? As you may be aware, currently we've got about 10 sectors that we have already identified as significant sources of air pollution, with over 400 activities that are currently regulated. So the printing industry is just but one part of those sectors that we have identified. The main interest here to us is the utilization of organic solvents and inks that result in emissions of volatile organic compounds, which when left unabated, they may cause direct or indirect impacts on human health and the environment. The other reason why we've got interest in regulating this sector is that some of the abatement equipment that is used or that are used in the sector to minimize the direct impacts, they've got potential to result in secondary pollutants such as oxides of nitrogen. In the atmosphere, photochemical oxidation of these pollutants result in the tropospheric ozone, which is a pollutant that triggers various upper respiratory problems, including reduction of lung function. So by law, we've got constitutional mandate to control all these sources, whether big or small, to make sure that the health of South Africans are not impacted negatively. Initially, the printing sector was included under the organic chemicals because we are of our interest on organic chemicals per se, not necessarily on who uses such chemicals. But after the Printing South Africa and packaging industry requested us to undertake, to give them time to undertake their own assessment and to make recommendations, the printing industry was removed from the organic chemicals regulation. So since 2010, this sector remains unregulated because we were still considering your inputs. Implications of the draft notice that has been published on the 7th of August 2020. Just to remind you, this notice was first or last published in 2017 when we asked for comments, and printing industry, as well as many other sectors and stakeholders, made representations on the shape and form of the notice. And because it's been long since we have last published this notice, we recommended to the minister that instead of publishing it or making it into law at this point, without considering the economic implications, as we know that the economy may have, it evolves and it may have changed since the last engagement with you. We recommended that we get an opportunity for us to debate this notice again in order to consider any new developments in the sector, to make sure that the law is justifiable, it's reasonable, and it's administratively or procedurally fair. So this is the reason why we have published this notice for the second round of public comment. So the notice, it provides for the control of volatile organic compounds and oxides of nitrogen, but it should be noted that the oxides of nitrogen are only controlled in cases where thermal treatment is involved. It provides accountability through compliance monitoring and reporting, as well as to enable inclusion of the sector's environmental footprint to the national emission inventory of air pollutants. Lastly, the notice, as like any other law, it prescribes the offenses for cases where there is non-compliances as well as related penalties. And in terms of the way forward, we have provided this sector an extension of the commenting period to the 22nd of September 2020. because we understand that during lockdown, it was difficult for you to meet and to consolidate all the comments from all affected companies. And so we are expecting the comments to be submitted by the 22nd of September. The department appreciates the sector's support to date, especially the work that Ian has done, as well as the legal support that Tina or Norton Rose has provided to shape the nature and form of this notice. And so we anticipate that we'll get additional comments from yourselves, which will be consolidated and with other comments and considered in informing the best approach to regulating the sector. Only after we have considered all these comments and made the final notice, we will then recommend it to the Minister for publication into the law. Thank you so much. My contacts are there should you need to contact me further.
Thank you, Oleboheng. We really appreciate you being part of this session. And thank you for the presentation. I think at this point in time, I'd like to move over to Tina, who's done quite a lot of work in this space. And Tina, perhaps maybe you want to give us some of the insights, so that our members can have a little bit of an idea of, the work that Norton Rose has done in relation to this act.
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Hi, everyone.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I might. As best as I can. So Mr. Madisesido and I and James have worked a long time together. In fact, since as long as 2009. And so he's given quite a good background, and I'm not going to dwell too much on that. I think it's important to understand that air quality was first regulated under APA, who had scheduled processes, and those processes were identified because of their need or their that they would cause emissions to the atmosphere and cause impacts. Those scheduled processes never included the printing industry, and they were under the old Atmospheric Pollution Prevention Act. What then happened and progressed is that we got the Air Quality Act, which is how air quality is now managed. And I'm giving you this brief history because it's important to understand where we're coming from in order to understand where we're going. During 2009, as far as I remember, there was some indication that the department, 2012, there were publications of the notices under Section 21, which means that the department identified for some reason the printing industry as an industry which would cause impacts to the environment because of their VOCs and the use of solvents. And Ian's going to go into more detail into that. We submitted a memorandum as far back as 2009, objecting to the inclusion, and printing industry was never included as a Section 21 activity. There is not much difference between a Section 23 and a 21 activity. And again, I'll get into those details, which is now what the department is proposing from an industry point of view and what the industry is required to do. So they're still required to comply with certain emission standards. They're required to report. The only difference really is that they don't need to obtain an air emission license, which is the difference between a Section 21 and 23 activity. So during 2012, the department again indicated that the printing industry would be included as Section 21 notice, and the printing SA then briefed Ian and I to do a detailed technical and legal study to understand why the printing industry was being included. And that's really an important point because the scientific evidence shows a different story. And in terms of section 21 and 23, the minister or MSC, when they declare an activity, so let's just deal with section 23 because that's where we're going, where they declare an activity as a controlled emitter, it must be because it results in atmospheric emissions which through ambient concentrations, bioaccumulation, deposition pose a threat to the environment or health. And in addition to that, they need to consider any sound scientific information and risk assessments. And again, why I'm going with this is because Ian has conducted detailed scientific assessments, which he's going to go into, to show that there isn't an impact on the environment, and it's not clear, therefore, why the printing industry is being regulated. The consequences of being regulated are important because it has vast economic implications, and to deal with that, we'll deal with that a little bit later with Ian as well. So we conducted a study in 2012. It was submitted to the department. We've had various negotiations. We've been working with the department since then. We met with them, we discussed the findings, and we submitted a memorandum in 2016, which was the last section 23 notice in response to that. As Obahelong is pointed out, the department has now reissued the notice. Now, there's not much difference. In fact, there is really no difference besides one or two irrelevant changes to the notice to what it was in 2016 to what it is now, which really questions my, is that did the department, have they really taken our studies and considerations into consideration and the points that we've made? There's some very important ones, and really it relates to Ian's study, which he will go through. So that's a bit of the background of where we've come from in dealing with the department as identifying the printing industry as an industry that needs to be regulated, as to where we're going. Just to understand, if you are regulated under section 23, what does that mean? How does that impact, and who is triggered? So the regulation as it stands will require, applies to, sorry, let me just get it in front of me. Right. Okay, it applies to, so printing, coating, lamination processes using gravure, flexography, rotary screen printing, heat set lithography, varnishing and printing systems, and systems that incorporate elements of those systems. So that's who's triggered. And it applies to installations with organic solvent consumption, and this is a really important point that Ian will probably dwell on, equal to or more than 25 tonnes per year. So that's who's triggered, who will then be regulated under this notice. And as far as we understand from our studies and from other studies that have been undertaken, it will cover at least 60% of the printing industry. And Ian can correct me if I'm wrong on that point. You will be required to comply with emission standards, and those are the emission standards that were indicated in terms of VOCs and oxides of nitrogen, so NOx. It was indicated that NOx will only need to be complied with if you use thermal oxidizers, and as I understand from Ian, that is really the only technology that you can use. So therefore, you will have to comply with the VOC and the NOx's limits for new and existing standards. There's a difference on time limits between when you will have to comply with the standards. But again, as I understand it, you wouldn't have technology to comply with one standard and then put in a different technology. So you would have to therefore comply with the technology, get the technology at a certain date, which I understand I think is 2021. And then you need to monitor and report on emissions in the prescribed format. So there are fairly onerous obligations to compliance to standards and to reporting, and I think Ian will address that in more detail. Importantly, Section 23 doesn't apply for exemption, so you can't apply for an exemption. So even if your facility, you do tests and you show that you're not emitting any VOCs, if you trigger the 25 ton threshold, you'll be caught. So there's no possibility for exemption, nor is there a possibility for compliance of timeframes. I think Ian will cover the 25 ton threshold in a little bit more detail, as well as the study results. And I think, I'm sorry, it's quite difficult to cover 10 years of work in 10 minutes, but I hope I've given an idea of where printing industry was never regulated. They are now being proposed to regulate, and what it means and who will be caught in that net, and what it means if you are caught in that net from a reporting obligation point of view. And I think Ian will go into a little bit more detail on that as well.
Thank you so much, Tina. I think, yeah, you've given us great context, because it's always important to know where you've been, you know, to obviously design where we're going. And you know, that being said, Ian, you've also done quite a considerable amount of work in this space on behalf of Printing SA as well. Do you want to maybe also just give us some insight into, you know, what that all entailed, and you know, maybe pick up on one or two points that Tina raised there?
I mean, I could give an overview of the process that we undertook, or just would you like me to refer to points that Tina raised?
Please, we're still ahead of time, so I think you can give an overview. It's not a problem.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, first of all, good morning. It's a pleasure to join with Printing SA again. I keep wanting to say PIFSA. Apologize for that. My name is Ian James, and I'm a director with WKC Group. I've been working in the field of air quality for 25 years in around 30 countries, 40 countries, and I've spent around 20 years advising in South Africa. And in 2012, as Tina mentioned, the emergence of regulations that cover the printing sector, they were necessarily complex. And to be quite frank, collectively, the DEA and PIFSA and key PIFSA members, we all agreed that actually wasn't enough information available to understand what the implications of these regulations were. And so in 2012, almost to the day, we placed a plan together, which would begin an 8-month study to figure out whether or not the printing sector of South Africa causes harm to the environment. And that was specifically related to solvent emissions. So you'll hear solvent emissions quite commonly during your working hours, but then when we do our environmental work, this is VOC, volatile organic compounds. So not to be confused, it's the same thing. So when we began the study, we sort of had 3 questions to answer. Basically, what did that threshold mean? Notwithstanding the threshold and how many plants would be affected by this regulation, what came out of vents? What solvents came out of vents, and how much? And then finally, if you had so much solvents coming out of a vent, what could you do to reduce it so you could comply with the regulation to meet what they call the VOC emission limit? What techniques or technology is available on the market that works to reduce that? And what are the implications of implementing it? So the first thing actually we did recognize collectively is that as a sector, the entire sector didn't know a great deal about how much solvent it used. Now, as you can see from the legislation, how much solvent you use defines whether or not you need to meet emission limits. So it's a very important point. And we undertook a survey of our PIFSA members to begin to understand how that looked. And in summary, there were some plants using, I think, towards maybe exceeding 1,000 tons. A lot of plants using less than 50 tons. But with the 25-ton limit or threshold, over, as Tina said, over 60% of the industry would be regulated. But this is a very important point, maybe even a question for Alebeheng. It's something we raised before. If the concern about solvent use and its release to the environment is warranted, that threshold should exclusively apply to the equipment that generates solvent emissions. I think there's an issue that you might be using more than 25 tons of solvent to clean your equipment, which goes out in waste drums and does not make air pollution. So I think this is one of those issues. The solvent threshold, I think its intent is to regulate solvent that goes in the air. If that's the case, around 60% of the industry members would be affected by these regulations and would need to meet the emission limits set by the DEA. If the threshold includes solvent full stop, then many more facilities will be included. Obviously, this is based on 2012 data. So without going too much into how this program progressed, quite simply, we selected 7 facilities which provided a broad spectrum of size and printing techniques and evaluated them. It included flexography, gravure, heat set printing. We did look at cold set digital printing, but excluded those as not being sources of VOCs, and lithographic printing processes as well. Generally speaking, there was a tendency for flexography, gravure, and heat set to generate emission concentrations of VOCs that exceeded the proposed limit. In other words, those types of printing techniques almost all the time exceeded the limit, necessitating VOC controls. Lithographic printing processes tended not to. That was general finding of the concentration in vents. Now, trying to understand whether or not these solvent emissions harm the environment, that's a complicated process, and it uses a technique called atmospheric dispersion modeling. Actually, it's a technique that's well known to the DEA, and myself, Alebeheng, and a number of others collectively created a guidance document on this practice. So it's a well-known practice, and we use this to answer the question, notwithstanding the size of facility or type of printing or solvent used, is there evidence of harm from emissions to the environment of solvents? Generally speaking, the conclusion we drew was that facilities in South Africa currently, or those evaluated, present little to negligible risk to human health, even when we look at the worst case eventuality of looking at the weather that moves the solvents to communities as quickly as possible, and at the highest rate of solvent emission that occurs, because solvent emission rates vary throughout the day. In other words, you could say that the likelihood of the printing sector facilities causing direct health effects or even problems with the smell of the solvent is extremely low. Even the largest facility tested, possibly the largest in the country, that was also not expected to create direct community health risks. The secondary health risk that Alebeheng mentioned relates to the formation of secondary pollutants. And none of the test case facilities generated any meaningful contribution to the formation of secondary pollutants, with the exception of the very largest that we looked at. Now, this I should err on the side of caution in also adding that, you know, the indication that we have that secondary pollutants may have been formed by the largest facility evaluated. It's an extremely complex type of modeling to do, and would warrant further evaluation before you drew any conclusions from that. The secondary pollutant formation process, by the way, is also, in a sense, an advantage. it implies that all solvents that actually enter the atmosphere naturally degrade, disperse, they do not accumulate, they do not persist or live a long lifetime or cause irreversible damage. So we determined that certain print facilities are going to be above the solvent threshold, most of them. We determined that most facilities will exceed the VOC limit in vents as they stand. So most of them will need some sort of control of VOCs in the vents associated with these facilities. So we looked at different ways of getting VOCs to be reduced in the vents. And there was it certainly wasn't my area of expertise, but the working committee from the printing sector who provided, and PIPSA who provided an excellent contribution to this topic, looked at alternative printing materials, but they determined right now that alternative printing materials that had lower VOC content had issues with viscosity, drying times, print quality, their general fitness for purpose, for example, whether or not they were safe for food grade packaging, and then of course the difference in cost. And this, in 2012, it was a very cost sensitive environment, the market. Presumably that has not got better with the lockdown. But so without being able to control easily at this stage the printing materials being used as a way to avoid VOCs and solvent emissions, there are lots of ways to stop emissions reaching the atmosphere by controlling the concentration at the vent. We looked at all of the mainstream methods. They included absorption, carbon absorption, they included condensation and cryogenic systems. But in all honesty, the technique that was reliable, it was feasible, available. However, I don't think there's a domestic. I do not think there is a domestic provider of this technology. So I went to Britain and I met with a leading provider of this technology to understand a bit more about the implications of having basically this technology applied. So this is called thermal oxidation. And thermal oxidation essentially means you burn off the solvents. Thermal oxidation is an appealing way to burn off solvents in England because it's very cold there. And actually what they do is they're using that heat to heat their factory. So in fact, thermal oxidation isn't just abatement, it's actually their heating system. Thermal oxidation is very effective at removing solvent emissions. However, there are some downsides. It requires a constant supply of power. If the VOC concentration inside your vent is low, but above the standard, you have to have propane added continuously. And the amount of propane that would need to be provided for in this economy right now, and I know that there are some energy shortfalls in South Africa, the amount of propane that you need to add would be significant. I mean, up to maybe 6 million rand of propane per year might be possible. Thermal oxidation itself, of course, is a source of greenhouse gas. It burns propane to supplement, the burning of the solvents, and it also produces a small amount of NOx. One of the pollutants Alebeheng mentioned, and NOx is about 1,000 times more toxic than solvents. So you feed solvents in and you produce NOx as a byproduct. But the important thing to recognize is whilst that's a risk for the environment, reputable providers of thermal oxidation systems and getting a stack height correct for a thermal oxidizer usually can control the impact of NOx on community health. So I'll just repeat that. By removing solvents, if there is a belief that that is causing community health impacts, you then have to control NOx, oxides of nitrogen, made by thermal oxidation as well. You make pollution by solving pollution. This we call a cross-media effect. So these systems are, of course, available in range of size. They do not scale down to very small plants. So if you're using 25 tons, 26 tons of solvent per year, you're going to be buying a very large thermal oxidizer that will use a very large amount of propane. The minimum cost of the thermal oxidizer, and this particular vendor I'm using data from has installed equipment, I believe, like this in South Africa. At the lowest end is 2 million rand for capital cost, excluding shipping and installation, scaling right up to the largest unit, which is 12 million rand. And the operational cost can range between 1 million rand right the way up to 6 million rand. The major factor being how much propane you need to feed the system to keep it functional and working correctly. Now, it's very hard for governments everywhere to hear numbers and know what they mean. Perhaps if you're working in this, what do they call it, sanitizer industry, these would be small numbers now with the amount of sanitizer they sold. So to understand what those numbers mean, actually in the field of air quality, we talk about cost effectiveness. So that means how much money do you have to spend to eliminate 1 ton of solvent? So the highest benchmark, and I've advised in over 45 countries, but worked in 35. The highest benchmark of what government was pushing to see a major company spend on pollution control was 50,000 rand per ton of emission removed. In South Africa, based on 2012 figures, and they may have changed substantially, the cost to remove 1 ton of solvent ranges between 60,000 rand to 260,000 rand per ton of VOC removed. So in 25 years of working in this field, these would be singularly the most ineffective in terms of cost, the most excessively expensive abatement techniques I've seen implemented in the world, by some margin, and of course, ironically, the cost effectiveness of these systems, they're more effective for very large plants that use a lot of solvent, and the small plants that use a marginal amount of solvent, that's where the cost effectiveness becomes absolutely incredibly high. So yeah. If I were to summarize 8 months in under 30 seconds, the regulation as it stands in its current form, as I said before, is expected to affect more than 60% of facilities. However, if solvent consumption is the trigger, and it doesn't matter what you're using solvent for, then many more facilities could be affected.
Yeah.
Our scientific studies have shown, and I believe we did not receive any feedback from the DEA, that the printing sector is very unlikely to cause or is causing direct harm to the environment.
Sure. Sorry, Ian. Sorry, Ian. I don't mean to cut you off there. We just I thought we had a lot of time, but you've given us quite a lot to digest there.
Oh,
so if you don't mind, I'll just. All right, carry on.
So I got 2 more lines. Sorry. So secondary impacts only possible for the very largest facility. Thermal oxidation is likely to be needed for most of these facilities which fall under the regulation. We must not forget that thermal oxidation itself produces greenhouse gas and NOx. And as I said before, in an unbalanced view, it's considered to be an excessively expensive proposition despite the scientific evidence showing there's little or no benefit directly to community health. Sorry, that was it.
Thank you so much, Ian. That was really, really comprehensive, and I think you've also highlighted some points there in terms of solvent, whether it's to use to clean the machinery or whether it's emitted. Have those factors been considered in setting the threshold? Which are very valid. And I think I'm looking at some of the questions coming in now. The costs that you've mentioned have literally, I think we had about 70 people on the webinar. Now we're down to 2. So I think you shocked the socks off everybody. But so, Oliver, just coming back to you whilst we've got you, because I think some of these questions, are directly targeted towards the department and some of the considerations you make. So I'd like to start with Mr. Bruce Allen, who's asked, can you please give me more details on RTO units generating NOx?
Okay. Yes. As you know, the technology of the RTOs, mainly because it behaves more like some of the authorities, they actually even confused it to be an incinerator. And there was a debate at some point where one industry wanted to actually, one local municipality wanted to include the RTOs under the incineration because of the confusion of the technology. And but the main source of the oxides of nitrogen is at the point of the stack, because as you may know, the combustion installations or thermal treatment operations such as the R2O, they depend on the use of the ambient air, which is naturally has got high levels of nitrogen. And the oxidation that happens at the point of the exit really, that's where it really generates significant amounts of oxides of nitrogen. So I don't know if I should get into the concerns and comments that have been made so far, or should we?
Yes, please, because I think they were very very insightful in terms of
and they're very important.
And
they're very important also on how the sector is going to shape the second the inputs that will be made before the 22nd. Tina is right. Tina is right in a sense where she says that the Equality Act, under the Equality Act, we should not be doing or making unfounded, I'm paraphrasing, unfounded regulation, because the law is very clear that the minister may identify activities only if they've got potential or if they do generate a significant environmental risk, or if they've got potential to do so. As you may know, is that in South Africa, while the doses are not mainly generating direct impacts, hence even under the ambient air quality, we have only listed the benzene. We have not listed many other pollutants, as for instance, the US EPA have got hazardous air pollutants and a list of toxics under that. In South Africa, our main concern is ozone creation. So it's mainly on secondary pollution. And we've got lots of a significant challenge on management of our ozone. And for us to do that, the law has to be very fair in terms of procedural fairness, in terms of identifying sources of primary sources of pollutants that will result in VOCs. And printing industries, for a fact, is that it's one of the sectors that will result in VOCs, including the vehicles, including the petrochemical sector, and many other sectors. So for us to get a good comprehensive emission inventory of who contributes how much, you need to somehow have a level of accountability. And hence, after Ian's study, which suggested that there are no proven significant health impacts, direct health impacts, although there were potential to have secondary or indirect impacts. That's why we reconsidered to remove the initial decision to list this under the licensing requirements and moved this to under Section 23. Because the intent here was that we need to somehow still be accountable for our footprint nonetheless, but without really a significant cost to industry. Air quality, like environmental management generally, is a very expensive exercise. And in a sector which is really struggling in terms of economy, as the printing industry has been impacted, we need to be very mindful of that. And hence we made such decisions on reducing legislative burden in terms of AELs, the cost to compliance of licenses, but still keeping control of some of the accountability that the sector should have, like all other sectors. The other thing is that when you make such decisions in terms of listing or delisting or choosing which industries to prioritize, all the law should be tested against the Constitution and the accompanying constitutional legislation like Promotion of Administrative Justice Act. And so in that instance, you will not have an instance where you are controlling VOCs from other activities, from other sectors, and only because we have not had significant, we have found that there's no significant direct impact of this sector, then you exclude it because it will be against the promotion of administrative justice in terms of fairness. So in terms of the accountability of environmental footprint, we need to understand all sources gradually. And this is where we find ourselves in. And what Ian and Tina has inferred in their comments is that it doesn't look like the department has really considered the full gravity of the studies and the proposals that have been made. But I would like to differ because considering, for instance, the recommendations that we've made on which sectors, which activities in the industry to regulate and not to regulate, we have taken that verbatim. Where we still have got an opportunity to really engage is on the threshold, because we know that that's where actually the test of significance and environmental risk is. And we have considered that initially, I think we're at 15 tons and we moved to 20 tons. And but we have considered that as well. So let me see if I've answered all the questions or summarized that.
Yeah, sorry, Oliver, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I've got two questions here, and I think these now speak more to the practicality of how this will all mesh together. So one of the questions is, who or how will this be regulated or policed? And the second question follow up to that was, what are the reporting mechanisms? Do you report manually? Do you report electronically? Do you report annually? Or how is it all going to work? Do you have that framework?
Okay, in terms of, we've got two reporting streams or mechanisms. The reporting for compliance, which will require industries to use the emission reports that have accompanied the notice and submit those to their local authorities where they are air quality officers. And compliance monitoring and enforcement is actually conducted at that level of municipalities. There's another level, a layer of compliance, of reporting, where we are accounting for emissions inventory. We've got a national atmospheric emission inventory system where we are consolidating all emissions in the country, and that information is actually used to influence or to shape the policy decisions that we make. So without the contribution of the sector, we will always be falling short of what is the actual extent of the footprint, environmental footprint of this sector in terms of managing the VOCs and the contribution thereof to the ozone production. So in that case, it's an electronic system. You report only once a year, and the department provides full support in terms of training to teach people how to use the system and to account for their environmental footprint.
Thank you. Then I think I see two people have asked this now. Mr. Gerald Chotu has said, what is government doing to financially support this industry on the capex cost or SRU or RTOs?
Okay. Unfortunately, government doesn't provide currently. Previously, we used to have environmental tax and some incentives, and those have fallen off over the years as the state became more and more, whether we call it thirsty or hungry for the tax collection. So currently we don't have environmental incentive, financial incentive, but on our side, in terms of air quality, hence we have been discussing this notice, as Tina said, since 2009 until now, but we have not enacted this yet, is that we want to be as reasonable as possible. And for instance, in terms of the emission requirements that we come up with, they should not force many industries to invest on, for instance, regenerative thermal oxidizers, which are quite expensive. So we are trying to balance the requirements as we go along in terms of the nature of the regulation, so that we don't make industries financially unsustainable going forward. And this is the reason why we are having this kind of debates, so that we continue to kind of refine and reconsider some of this, to say, have we done enough in terms of defining environmental significance in terms of the thresholds, and what will be the implications if the notice is left as it is at this point? Or do we still have got other opportunities to be able to account without necessarily expecting a lot of costs on the industry sector? Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Look, that almost brings us to the end of our session. There are a number of questions, unfortunately, we didn't get to. But Olibogeng, what we'll do is we'll consolidate them and we'll send them through to you. If you could possibly maybe give us your response, and then we will circulate that to the attendees on this webinar. But from our side as Printing SA, we just want to thank our panelists, Tina, Ian, as well as yourself and the department for availing yourselves. I think you have definitely enlightened us a lot in terms of the Act and what's required. And yeah, we look forward to putting together a comprehensive, report to yourselves by the 22nd. Megan, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you to all our panelists and our attendees. We hope it's been an informative session. You can find the replay of this webinar as well as our other informative webinars on africaprint.com live. Thank you, everyone, and take care.